Dear Taurus, have you ever had one of those strange moments where everything around you looked completely normal, and yet something inside you suddenly slowed down for a second? Maybe it happened while you were standing in front of a big decision, an old relationship quietly finding its way back into your life, a choice that made part of your heart want to move forward, while another part still didn't feel completely at peace. And somewhere in the middle of all those thoughts, you suddenly felt a small wave of warmth, a familiar scent passing through the air, an old song playing at exactly the right moment. Or maybe it was simply that feeling like someone was quietly beside you even though the room itself was completely silent. A lot of Taurus people don't really talk about moments like that because you're the kind of person who tries to make sense of life through practicality. You're used to carrying things on your own, getting through things on your own, becoming the steady places everyone else leans on. But sometimes there are certain connections in life that don't completely disappear just because time has passed. There are people who may have left this world a long time ago, and yet somehow they still leave behind a very quiet kind of love. Not loud, not frightening, just a gentle presence, showing up during the seasons when your heart feels the most tired. And maybe lately, a part of you has started noticing that feeling more than usual. Not to scare you, not to predict something dark ahead, but almost as if someone is trying to remind you to slow down for a moment, to listen to yourself a little more carefully, and maybe not keep walking back into the same emotional cycles that leave your heart exhausted all over again. Because sometimes, the people who understand a Taurus silence the most deeply are the ones who once loved you without conditions. And the strange thing is, they often leave signs in very small ways. So small that if you aren't truly quiet enough to notice them, you might miss them completely. Maybe tonight, that's part of the reason you found yourself here listening to these words. So before we go any deeper into this message, take a moment and think back. Lately, have there been any signs in your life that keep appearing again and again? There's something very strange about Taurus. You tend to remember things that other people forget so easily, not just a person, but the feeling of them, a voice echoing softly from the kitchen late at night, the sound of familiar slippers moving down the hallway, the scent of medicated oil drifting through the air on a rainy day, or an old song suddenly playing in the middle of a grocery store, and for a few seconds your heart just stops. Even you can't fully explain why. A lot of Taurus people are deeply practical. You don't easily believe in things that feel too vague or distant. You like things you can touch, things you can hold on to, things that feel certain. And maybe that's exactly why. When something keeps appearing again and again in your life, your heart quietly notices it, even if your face pretends nothing happened. Maybe lately, you've been seeing familiar numbers showing up during oddly specific moments. Some nights, you look up at the clock without thinking and it's exactly 11:11 p.m. Then a few days later, it happens again at 2:22 in the middle of a long, quiet night. At first, you brush it off as coincidence. But when it keeps happening, a Taurus heart tends to hold on to those moments in silence. Sometimes it's the birthday of someone you once loved very deeply. Sometimes it's a number tied to an old memory you thought you had forgotten years ago. And the reason Taurus stays quiet about these things isn't because you don't feel something. It's because part of you worries you might be too sensitive in a world that constantly asks adults to be rational all the time. But sometimes, the things that make us stop aren't necessarily big or dramatic. Sometimes, it's simply because a part of you recognizes something familiar trying to reach you one more time. A lot of people say meaningful signs often arrive through dreams. And strangely enough, Taurus dreams usually aren't intense or chaotic. They're often very ordinary. So ordinary, they feel almost like real memories. An old house, a family dinner, someone sitting quietly in a familiar corner you haven't seen in a very long time. There's no prophecy, nothing frightening. Just the feeling that they're there, quiet, calm, as if they only wanted to see you for a moment before you wake up and return to this busy life again. And what's interesting is, dreams like that often show up during the seasons when Taurus is deeply exhausted, when you start doubting yourself, when you've been trying to stay strong for too long, when you sit alone in your car after a long day and realize you no longer know where your heart is trying to go anymore. Some nights, you pick up your phone just trying to find something to make the emptiness feel a little smaller. Scrolling through meaningless things, reading old messages again, listening to the exact song you used to play years ago, and suddenly, a very old memory comes back. Not painfully, but enough to leave you sitting there quietly for a very long time. Taurus people rarely talk openly about missing someone. You carry that feeling inside you the same way you keep old clothes you no longer wear anymore, unable to throw them away, but not knowing what to do with them either, except leave them folded in some hidden corner. Maybe that's why small signs tend to affect you more deeply than most people realize. The scent of a familiar meal suddenly appearing in the middle of an ordinary day. Your mother's perfume still lingering on an old scarf. The smell of warm tea that reminds you of evenings spent beside your grandparents years ago. And in moments like that, time almost seems to slow down. You're no longer fully standing in the present anymore. It feels more like you've been gently pulled back to a very old place inside your heart. A lot of Taurus people say they never really believed in signs until life started bringing them uncomfortably close. One woman once shared that she kept seeing a white bird outside her window for weeks, right around the time she was considering returning to a relationship that had once emotionally drained her. Another person said he hadn't dreamed about his father in years, but right before he was about to quit his job and leave the city, his father suddenly appeared very clearly in a dream. He didn't say much. He simply sat there drinking tea the way he used to when he was alive, and what stayed with him the longest was the strange sense of peace he felt after waking up. Maybe what touches a Taurus heart isn't whether these signs are real or not. Maybe it's the feeling that somewhere inside this loud and exhausting world, there's still a form of love that never completely disappeared. A kind of love that doesn't need to appear every single day, doesn't need to speak out loud, but still manages to soften your heart right when you thought life had made you emotionally numb. And maybe lately, you've been moving through a season like that too. A season where intuition feels louder than usual, where old memories return more often, where emotions you thought had fallen asleep quietly wake up again late at night. Maybe not every sign carries some deep meaning, but sometimes the simple fact that your heart keeps thinking about someone at this exact point in your life is enough to make you pause for a moment and listen to yourself more carefully. Because maybe, behind all those very small signs, it isn't just nostalgia. Maybe it's also a very gentle reminder that something in your life right now needs your attention before you continue moving forward. And maybe that's exactly why those signs have been showing up more often lately. Maybe it isn't random that you keep thinking about the past right when your heart has started feeling tired. Maybe it isn't random either that your intuition feels more sensitive than usual during days that seem completely ordinary on the surface. Because sometimes, a Taurus heart gets so used to enduring things for so long that even you stop noticing how exhausted you've become. You still go to work, still answer messages, still take care of everyone the way you always do, still try to keep everything stable. But only you really know there are nights when you lie awake staring at the ceiling without ever falling asleep. Mornings when your body still carries the heaviness from the day before. And brief quiet moments in the middle of the day when you suddenly wonder to yourself, how much longer can I keep doing this? Taurus people don't let go easily, especially when it comes to things you once poured your heart into. An old relationship, a promise that once felt deeply sincere, someone who hurt you, but also once made you feel incredibly loved. And sometimes, right when your heart starts feeling softer than usual, that person suddenly reappears. An old message showing up unexpectedly, a harmless little check-in, a late-night phone call. Everything arrives so gently that part of you starts thinking maybe this time will be different. But deep inside, there's still a part of you that doesn't fully feel at peace. It's a difficult feeling to explain, like walking past an old familiar road, and somehow your body remembers the sadness before your mind does. And maybe that's what these signs have quietly been trying to make you notice. Not to make you afraid of love, not to make you distrust everyone around you, but simply to remind you that a heart that's been exhausted for too long can sometimes return to old places just because it misses the feeling of belonging somewhere. And this isn't only about relationships. A lot of Taurus people lately have been carrying very quiet pressure around money, responsibility, and the future they're trying to build for themselves. Maybe you've been holding too many things at once, trying to earn more, trying to make life more stable for your family, trying to become the person everyone can rely on. But what very few people realize is the strongest person in the family is often the loneliest one too, because you've gotten so used to saying, it's okay, even when deep down you're almost completely out of energy. And maybe that's when the old memories, the dreams, and the quiet little signs start appearing more often. Not like a prediction, more like someone gently placing a hand on your shoulder, the way older family members sometimes do when they can tell you're tired, even though you refuse to say it out loud. Almost as if they're trying to remind you that not every opportunity that appears while you're emotionally vulnerable is something you need to hold on to. And not every burden needs to be placed back onto your shoulders again. Because sometimes The most dangerous thing for Taurus isn't losing something. It's continuing to endure for far too long, simply because you don't want to disappoint anyone. You're used to being the stable one in everyone else's eyes, the person who always shows up at the right time, the one who quietly carries more than your share without ever really talking about it, the one who still tries to smile even when your inner energy is almost completely drained, and maybe that's exactly why those signs aren't showing up to frighten you. Maybe they're appearing to slow you down before your heart drifts too far away from its own peace. Because sometimes, the people who love you the most notice your exhaustion before you notice it yourself, not through words, but through feeling, like a very gentle hand resting on your shoulder, right in the middle of you trying to hold yourself together one more time. Like an unexpected moment of silence appearing in the middle of a busy day, just long enough for you to finally realize how tired you've really become. And if these recent signs are trying to tell you anything at all, maybe it's not as complicated as you think. Maybe it's simply, don't keep pushing yourself so hard. Maybe it's, rest for a little while before you keep going. Or maybe even simpler than that. This time, listen to yourself before you listen to everyone else. Taurus often lives through responsibility more than emotion. You weigh everything carefully. You think things through for a long time. You try to find the most reasonable answer before making any decision. But sometimes, your intuition already knew the answer much earlier than your mind did. You've just become so used to doubting your own feelings. There are relationships where from the very beginning, your heart never truly felt safe. But you stayed a little longer anyway, hoping things would eventually change. There are opportunities that look wonderful from the outside. Exciting, tempting, almost impossible to turn down. And yet, deep inside, your body feels heavy every time you think about them. And strangely enough, Taurus often feels things through the body before the mind fully understands them. A deeper sigh than usual. A tiredness you can't really explain. A sleepless night before making a decision. Or that small sinking feeling in your chest after reading a message that seemed harmless on the surface. Maybe that isn't weakness. Maybe that's simply your intuition trying to protect you in a very quiet way. So maybe during this season, what you need isn't to force yourself to become stronger. Maybe what you need is permission to soften a little. Go to sleep earlier one night. Eat a real meal instead of surviving on coffee all day. Put your phone down sooner than usual. Sit quietly by the window for a few minutes without trying to solve one more thing. It sounds so small, but sometimes healing for Taurus doesn't begin with dramatic changes. It begins the moment you stop forcing yourself to suffer silently all the time. And maybe lately, it's been a very long time since you honestly asked yourself, am I really okay? Not the answer you give to make other people feel better, but the honest answer you quietly give yourself. And maybe that's exactly what the people who have always loved you quietly have been trying to remind you of lately. Not to control your life, not to make you live in fear, but simply to help you remember that you deserve care too, in the same way you've always cared for everyone else. Maybe that's also something a lot of Taurus people have forgotten after spending so many years living through responsibility. You're used to putting other people first, used to becoming the stable place people return to whenever their own lives start falling apart, used to listening to everyone else open up, while rarely speaking honestly about your own emotions. So sometimes, even when your heart is already exhausted, you keep moving forward as if everything is still fine. And maybe that's exactly why those quiet reminders have started appearing now. Not to make you afraid of the future, not to make you believe something terrible is waiting ahead, but more like a small light switching on in the middle of the night, so you can finally see yourself a little more clearly before you wander too far inside your own exhaustion. Because sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who most needs to be held. And maybe the most beautiful thing about Taurus is that no matter how many times life has disappointed you, there's still a very gentle part of you that never completely disappeared. You still believe in sincerity. You still feel moved by small things. You still remember the people who once loved you honestly for a very long time. Like the earth after a long season of rain, no matter how cold or heavy the surface becomes, something underneath is still quietly holding on to life. That's a very Taurus kind of strength. Not loud, not dramatic, not something that needs to prove itself to anyone, just the ability to remain standing after so many things that could have easily broken you. There have been seasons where you carried far more alone than anyone truly realized. Sleepless nights followed by mornings where you still went to work like nothing happened. Moments where you smiled while quietly swallowing your emotions because you didn't want the atmosphere to become too heavy for everyone else. Long stretches of time where you had to stay strong so constantly, you almost forgot what it felt like to lean on someone yourself. And strangely enough, Taurus rarely calls that pain. You usually just tell yourself, I can handle a little more. But maybe real healing doesn't begin by becoming better at enduring things. Maybe it begins the moment you realize you don't have to keep living in survival mode forever. Some wounds don't disappear with time. They simply stay quiet until the body finally starts speaking for them through exhaustion, through sleeplessness, or through that lingering emptiness that never fully goes away. So if lately you've been feeling more sensitive than usual, more emotional, or finding yourself constantly revisiting old memories, maybe your heart is simply asking for real rest. Not the kind of rest where you pause for a few hours only to force yourself back into survival again, but the kind of rest where you allow yourself to soften a little without feeling guilty for it. Maybe tonight, after this video ends, you'll sit quietly for a few extra minutes instead of immediately reaching for your phone the way you usually do. Maybe you'll think about someone whose name you haven't spoken in a very long time, or suddenly feel like listening again to an old song you once shared with someone in a brightly lit kitchen years ago. And maybe in that very small moment, you'll realize something you forgot a long time ago, that after everything life has taken from you, you are still here, still gentle, still capable of love, still trying to live with kindness even after your share of disappointments. That isn't weakness. That's the quiet beauty of a heart that has survived many storms, without allowing itself to become completely cold. And maybe that's what all these signs have been trying to remind you of. Not that you need to become someone different, but that maybe it's time to return to the peaceful part of yourself that was always there beneath everything. Because after all, what keeps Taurus moving forward has never been strength alone. It's also the quiet ability to recover, even after days when you honestly thought you had nothing left inside you anymore. And maybe that's also why these signs aren't appearing to pull you away from life. Maybe they're appearing to bring you closer to yourself again. Closer to the part of your heart that has spent far too long doing nothing but trying. Closer to the sense of peace you once carried inside yourself before life started moving too fast. Because sometimes, the most healing thing for Taurus isn't finding more answers. It's finally allowing yourself to slow down long enough to truly hear your own heart again. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to turn everything into some mysterious ritual. Maybe it's simply a quiet night. You dim the lights in your room, put your phone down, make yourself a warm cup of tea, and sit silently for a few minutes with the slow sound of the fan turning and that soft yellow light filling the room. A lot of the time, it's in moments that simple that a Taurus heart finally begins to relax for real. Maybe you light a small candle, not to ask for anything, not to call out to anything unknown, but simply as a gentle way of telling yourself, tonight, I'm allowed to rest for a little while, and maybe, once the noise outside finally softens, you'll begin to notice emotions you've been avoiding for a very long time. Maybe it's sadness you never fully named. Maybe it's exhaustion you've spent too long pretending wasn't there. Or maybe it's simply missing someone more deeply than you realized. Taurus people don't always express emotions immediately. You carry things very deeply. So deeply that sometimes even you forget how much you've been holding inside yourself. And maybe that's why writing down a few honest thoughts at the end of the day can make the heart feel lighter than you expected. It doesn't have to sound beautiful. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Write about what exhausted you today. Write about the person you still quietly think about late at night sometimes. Write about the feelings you always hide behind the words, I'm fine, even when you're not completely fine at all. Because some emotions, once they're finally given words, stop feeling quite so heavy inside the heart. And if one day you suddenly feel the urge to open your window at midnight and take a deep breath, to walk a little slower on your way home, or sit quietly listening to an old song without trying to do anything else, maybe that isn't weakness. Maybe it's simply your soul trying to find its way back to peace again. Because after everything, where these signs are trying to lead you probably isn't fear. Maybe it's connection to memory, connection to the people who once loved you. And even deeper than that, a connection back to the gentle part of yourself that busy life made you forget for far too long. And when the heart finally starts becoming quiet again in that slow and tender way, maybe you'll begin to understand why there are certain presences in this life that even after they can no longer be seen, never truly leave us completely. Maybe they don't appear through anything dramatic, not through miracles, not through clear predictions. Maybe it's only through very small signs, small enough to make you pause for a few seconds in the middle of a life that moves too fast. An old song playing right when your heart starts feeling heavy. A dream that leaves you waking up with a strange sense of peace, a familiar scent passing through an otherwise ordinary day. And sometimes, just that alone is enough to make someone who has been strong for far too long feel a little less alone. Maybe that's the most beautiful part of stories like this. Not that we find perfect answers for everything, but that the heart still remains capable of being moved by gentle things. Taurus moves through life with endurance. You carry more than most people realize. You stay silent about more than you ever say out loud. And maybe because of that, sometimes you forget that you also deserve love. You also deserve rest. You also deserve someone quietly reminding you. You don't have to hold everything together alone forever. And maybe that's part of the reason you stayed here until the very end of this story tonight. Maybe before this night is over, someone will suddenly cross your mind more strongly than usual. A name, a birthday, an old memory you haven't spoken about in years. And if that happens, maybe just let your heart remember. Because sometimes the simple act of speaking about someone gently is already a beautiful way for love to continue living on in this world. And if you still find comfort in quiet moments like these, in slow stories meant to be listened to at the end of a long day, then maybe you'll want to stay here a little longer with the Taurus stories in the days ahead. But for now, be gentle with yourself tonight. And if the world outside happens to feel quiet, maybe somewhere inside that silence, a small part of your heart is finally beginning to feel a little more at peace again.